Be sure to subscribe and like our channel. Every show we start off, like I'm reminded that that's actually one of my rituals. That is
It is.
So like I forget, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was like, yeah.
I remember that. I remember that Zintin.
Oh, I know. So where are we? We are at 607 Gerard Street, East Chinatown. Who knows? Maybe we'll move soon. We don't know, but we're thinking about it. If you are curious, come down to 607 Gerard Street. If people come to the show when it's live, we put the big screen television on and kind of let people interact with the guests too, as well, because as we usually say every week, this is live radio. We have a history of live radio. We're not really a podcast in the same way. Well, we have a podcast after the fact. Really, we're live radio specialists. I don't know how to say it. Live radio disc jockeys. Didn't video kill the radio star? Something, right?
Something.
Maybe. I know. We're like so old school. We're like, yeah, let's get back on FM. Let's get back on FM or AM. But not AM because they're canceling AM from everyone's cars right now, based on what I said. So no more AM. And tomorrow, if you are a sponsor and help us keep the lights on, we are going to do the Chinese God of War, one of them. There's probably more than one. But this is the only one that actually, after being exposed to him, I continuously see in dreams all the time. And he says I do a good job sometimes. So, a lot of dream encounters with this particular entity. So, that's tomorrow. Zach, tell us more about tomorrow for sponsors. If you're not a sponsor, help us keep the lights on. But this is the kind of stuff you get.
Yeah, so tomorrow's ritual is going to be with Wan Gong, God of War, one of the many in Chinese. It just depends which dice you throw in particular, but that's going to be used for protection. So if you need protection or you need to break against negativity and purify, whatever along those lines, that's the ritual for our sponsors tomorrow. And if you become a sponsor, you can come live for the event. However, you can also get that on record. So you have that and access to 3.5 years, I think, of rituals and workshops. If you become a $40 member,
there's over 100 different workshops that we run on the store and rituals. So, quite a large library of actual, real of us. There's so many times where we're crying after those rituals. Like you know that, right? It's all recorded.
Yeah. It is, but that's what they get—the real stuff, the hardcore stuff.
So become a sponsor, and then we'll see everyone tomorrow. You help us keep the lights on. You help us bring people in. And today, who was our five? Before we go any further, go ahead and talk while I hold the book up.
Yes. So today we got David Shi. He's a shamanic worker and folk magic practitioner and engages in traditional North Asian forms of shamanism. David's practices are deeply rooted in spirit work in which ancestral and land spirits are called to empower all workings. He has appeared at conferences and festivals throughout the U.S. and is always aiming to introduce Westerners to Eastern spiritualities and helping fellow Asian Americans connect to their spiritual roots. And you can follow him on Instagram at David J. Shi 311. Welcome to the show, David.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Extended book promo right there, covering my face for you. See, there we go.
So what inspired you to write the book, David?
It's kind of a funny question. I don't know if it's so much inspiration as much as the publisher kind of knocking at my door for 5 years straight. And pretty much for those of you who don't know, I did have another book come out back in 2016. And since then, this publisher, Wiser, has been asking me every year to write a book. And every year I've said no, because I had no idea what to write about. Now, it was actually during the pandemic when I was asked again. I actually took a look at my bookshelf and said, so currently the only thing missing is a single book that serves as like a roadmap to all of the different traditions of shamanism that exist throughout North Asia, throughout Mongolia, Siberia, Manchuria, North China. It's every single resource that's out there is they're very deep into one specific tradition. They're often very academic, they're very often inaccessible, very expensive, and they're so dry and boring to read. For people who are not familiar with that specific region, it's going to go over their head. It went over my head a little bit. So basically what I wanted to do with this book is, people say it's in depth. I did not plan it to be in depth. I planned it to be comprehensive, covering a very large territory of traditions that are interrelated, that they are very much related to each other. I celebrate what they share, what is different between them, and also for people who are not familiar with the region, it's a good introduction to generally what is going on over there. Everyone in the world who's read anything about shamanism, the first few sentences say that the word comes from North Asia, comes from the Tungusic peoples, the Evenk peoples of Siberia, and then that's where that conversation stops before it goes into something else. So the purpose of this book is to go, well, wait a minute, well, who are these people? What do they do? What is it they practice? Why is the word from their culture so widespread around the world? So I definitely wrote this book to be very easy to read. I write it in ways that I hope that people from other parts of the world will still find relatable, yet it will still be a good introduction to what is going around. And frankly, what is North Asia? That's also a big question that a lot of people, that even a lot of Asians are not actually necessarily quite sure of.
Right. It is a large continent. So
yes. Yeah.
So interesting enough, you kind of mentioned put a good context on there. This is sort of a roadmap, like a starting point. I think that's important. When people are seeing the book, which is here again, the roadmap is sort of like the starting point. But you do give a lot of resources, I have to say, to actually kind of go further in the endnotes and the bibliography. There's a ton of extra. You could go further from here.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of different citations, because the thing is with the information from this book, there's obviously a good chunk that of things that I just personally already knew, but I need to provide reference sources for people who don't know, where they can find this information. And a lot of the information, the references and the citations that I put in, people can feel free to go look for them, but as I've kind of mentioned, a lot of them are hard to find. Some of those books can easily go several $100s, and some of them are there was this one book that is extremely rare to find in the West. I found in a gift shop in Mongolia.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good score.
Yeah, and published during Soviet times, of course.
So we have a whole book that you've written, but let's start with the simple definition. What is a shaman?
Sure. So, and this is where I start to piss people off. The word shaman, from our traditional definition, the best definition that exists out there is that it refers to someone who was chosen by specific ancestral shamanic spirits when they are born to act as a conduit or a bridge between the human and physical worlds, in which they do two things. One is transpossession, and two is spirit flight. And when they do these things, it's gone through deliberate, controlled trance states, in which the shamanic spirits that chose the shaman at birth are the ones that help facilitate this. They are the ones that possess the shaman when they are born, and they're the ones who escort the shaman's soul during spirit flight. So a lot of parts of this definition are going to sound very familiar to different traditions around the world, but I do want to emphasize that a lot of people, especially in the West, they view the definitions of roles like shamans as in terms of what they do, and that's not really what it is. It comes down to what that person is and what they are born with. So shamans are actually born. It's from our point of view, it is not possible to study to become a shaman. You are born one, and then you go through the signs of shamanic sickness, of being struck down by spirits, in which elders then have to diagnose and recognize what is going on, in which case you do spend a life in service to those specific spirits. So a lot of it is come down to the fact that it's someone who is chosen when they're born to do these things. And the reason why they get chosen is oftentimes these shamanic ancestral spirits are spirits who were once shamans when they themselves were living. So actually, this is actually the basis of the lineage. A shaman and their shamanic spirits, when the shaman passes away, they then serve as a shamanic spirit that then chooses the next generation of shamans from within their lineage. So that is pretty much what it means from our definition. I know the word shaman tends to get thrown around a lot, especially in the West. And from my observation, this is what I will say. Outside of North Asia, primarily Asian regions, whether it's North Asian, Central Asian, Himalayan, which is where most of these traditions are, very few spiritual traditions outside of this region are shamanic traditions. But that said, I have noticed cases where there are individuals within non-shamanic traditions, which I would consider to be shamans, because they fall under that definition, in the sense that if someone, I've seen, like, for example, I've come across instances where there are individuals from West Africa who have been identified as someone who has spiritual talent, and they have to initiate as a priest or priestess or equivalent in their tradition. And if they cannot, they will actually suffer and potentially die. This is not the case for everyone, but there are individual cases of that happening, in which cases those specific people I would consider to probably be shamans within the context of how we recognize it. So
I would
a lot of information
definitely argue the fact that this is more common in Eastern Europe than you think.
Okay.
As well. Generally speaking, if you will get sick, or even I could say from personal experience, have bad luck or nearly die several times until you accept sort of what's going on. And that's pretty common when you get past the pre-communist takeover of sort of all the Eastern Slavic states. Had very similar type of, you don't really say no.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that we actually consider some of our most distant cousins to our traditions as actually being the Hungarian traditional belief system, as well as the Sami in northern Scandinavia. So we actually consider those to be sort of our cousins, our furthest cousins. So it's very possible that people, whether it's from those regions or from Western Siberia of that lineage, who people mix, so that then that bloodline gets passed down. So that is definitely, I do see that being very much in the realm of possibility of it being more common in Eastern Europe than, let's say, other parts of like Southern or Western Europe.
Why do you think this definition pisses people off?
Yeah.
Well, because so here's the thing. Within our cultures, the way that we see shamans, because a lot of it is against a person's free will, we oftentimes see it as a curse, actually, like the curse of being a shaman. It's not something that most families want. And what has happened in the West is that the word has become sexy. So a lot of people seem to equate that word with a lot of power or enlightenment or something. So a lot of people like to use that word because of how good it sounds, regardless of whether or not they are actually even adhering to actual shamanic concepts. And so there's a lot of people who like to use that word to apply to things that frankly have nothing to do with actual shamanic concepts. A lot of Western spiritual practitioners who they might be very legitimate in what they're actually doing, but they're mislabeling what they're doing as shaman or shamanism. And then there's people like me who are like, oh, I love what you're doing. It's so great. It's so powerful. It's not shamanism. And that tends to, and sometimes people take that as a personal attack. because a lot of people have started to equate when people like me or other traditional practitioners, when we say that is not shamanism, that people equate that to us as saying you are not legitimate, when that's not necessarily true. It's just an orange and a grapefruit are not the same thing, even though they're both citrus fruits. It's kind of what it comes down to. And so that's pretty much the reason. I know, like with Western marketing, the word shamanic is thrown around all the. I know one friend of mine actually saw something marketed as shamanic shampoo. If you want to get into the really,
yeah, we have that. We have that in Toronto.
Yeah, we've seen that.
All right.
You don't, yeah. But it's interesting because this gets into a very interesting point in the mindset, is that ultimately, this is something that me and Zach in our store, we have a store here, we often talk about things, is we often describe shamanic work as a curse. And you use the same word. We're like, yeah, we would rather not. Most people would rather not have the burdens that you're describing.
Yeah.
Like that it's not it can be a blessing after a while, but it's not, it doesn't feel that way at first. Like, or it doesn't feel that way for a lot of days. Like, you might not want to do shit and you're told go do it. Like, and like, maybe it's not quite so you don't have any free will, but at first it does feel that way. Like, and one of the things that you also talked about was shamans initially get beat up. Like the classic stories of Siberian shamans, or even shamans in Eastern Europe, is that you are probably going to nearly die before you accept this. Like you're probably going to be like fighting it tooth and nail and then almost die and have no choice to accept the reality of what's going on, which doesn't sound like a fun time.
Does not.
It doesn't sound like a fun weekend shamanic gathering, at a 5-star resort. It sounds like a painful, difficult process that leaves scars. So I can definitely see where you're coming from, where this would be considered sort of a curse. A curse, you die or you overcome the curse, basically, by going all in. That's sort of not really fun. That's not like, hi, this is nice shot, talk to spirits vacation. It's sort of like you're gonna die or go insane or something, like, because of what's being presented until you break through and kind of.
Especially oftentimes, because a lot of these spirits are ancestral spirits, and I'm sure that this is the case in every culture, but because coming from an Asian culture, when you talk to Asian elders, they expect to be treated like elders. You're supposed to do what they say because they're elders. Now, and this carries on into when they do become a spirit. So there is that, like, you don't disobey your elders. There's very much that that mentality that's going on that is still preserved even within the spirit worlds.
Because they beat you up.
Yeah.
Yes, they will beat you.
Which means causing pain in your physical world till you listen.
Yep, pretty much. I'm very lucky in the sense that my main shamanic ancestral spirit is actually what we would call a grandma spirit, and she is a lot more, understanding and tolerant. So I'm able to get away with a lot of things, but I know a lot of people don't have the same, luxuries that I have in that sense.
Fair. Grandma's gonna be a grandma, so
yeah.
Luck of the draw.
We'll probably get more cooked dinners and encouragement than beat by a bamboo stick.
Or by a riding crop, because in the north.
Or a riding crop, yeah.
Yeah. more horse riding up there.
So one of the things that you mentioned in the book is how, from a North Asian perspective, Buddhism did have a big effect on the culture overall. So, you're talking about karma and how, some shamans are like, yeah, karma is cool. Other ones are like, yeah, we don't even bother with it. So how does that kind of work in the intermixing of those different cultural groups, or even within the individual tribes themselves?
So yeah, different tribes have varying levels of Buddhist influence, but at this point in history, as in like right now, there are certain concepts within Buddhism that's now pretty much widely accepted amongst all tribes. Like the way that they see karma is like they do believe in karmic law, first of all. Like pretty much every tradition believes in karmic law, but the way that they see it is that they almost see it as a checks and balances, or rather they see it like a debit or credit essentially. And they see that if a lot of traditions would see karma as something as what you are providing into the world versus what you are taking from the world. So, you know, whether you're doing something for selfish or selfless. And so pretty much every shaman will try to live their life with as much merit as possible, because merit does create a certain type of karma, so that eventually with some shamans, if they do want to perform wrathful or harmful work, they're like, man, I can afford it. So it's almost like I can pay for that. But in other cases, not some shamans, and other shamans are like, I'm not going to even go there. I'm not going to touch that at all, because even outside the realm of karma, if you are dealing with wrathful and harmful work, you will still be engaging with certain spiritual entities that you need to be prepared to deal with. And your spirits need to be prepared to deal with. So there are a lot of shamans who just don't go that route at all, just for, you know, just in case. But there are those who particular powerful shamans, because they have particularly powerful spirits who are really not afraid of anything, and they'll still there are individual elders as well as even individual tribes that are infamous for their ability to do cursing and hypnosis, and so they have experience in the field, so they have no problem with doing it. But it really does depend, because the Buddhism that did come into most of North Asia is actually Tibetan Vajrayana Buddhism, which in itself already has a lot of wrathful work involved. So in that sense, it's not that it doesn't, that in itself doesn't become a clash in terms of shamans who have adopted whether it's wrathful shamanic work versus wrathful Buddhist work. I mean, that's not to say this. I mean, this comes in the backdrop of that Buddhism's entry into North Asia was in itself already very violent and very bloody. So there's already a whole history behind, you know, the relationship between those who practice shamanism, those who practice Buddhism, those who ended up doing a little bit of both. But yeah, it's a very fascinating topic, to be sure.
Right. So in terms of more of since that's such an not overview, but overlay in the cultures, do you find that the shamans in those cultures will actually do, say, bodhisattva work or Buddha work on top of their ancestral spirits or possibly land spirits?
It really depends. It depends on the tribe, and it depends on the spirits as well. So I will say there is one tribe in South Siberia. They're a Mongolic tribe of South Siberia called the Buryats. The Buryats are considered to be some of the most integrated in terms of shamanic and Buddhist work, to the extent that one thing I talk about in the book is that there are different types of shamans, and in their tribe they have black shamans and white shamans. Now, black shamans deal primarily with the shamanic spirits, the ancestral shamanic spirits, as well as the shamanic land spirits. Whereas the other type of shaman they have called white shamans, they say they do both as well, but I've looked over some of the things that they've performed, some things that they've written down, and I'm like, this is a lot of Buddhist mantras that you're using. This is a lot of Buddhist deities that you're. It's most of it. Actually, to be frank, they say it's both, but it's really most of it. So I'm like, I can see why your rival tribe, the Darkhaids, in the other part of North Mongolia, they say that you guys are all just pretty much Buddhist shamans. And actually, it's really funny. There's an expression within Mongolia, and well, not expression. There's a label in North Mongolia, labeling shamanic traditions as black shamanism versus yellow shamanism. Now, black shamanism, the Darkhad tradition, which I do talk about in my book, they live in a very remote valley that's very isolated. It's very hard, even today, it's very hard to get there. So their tradition experienced the least external influence. There is a little bit of Buddhist influence, but not substantial. So they call themselves black shamans, or the black shamanism, because they have the least external influence. Whereas the Buryats, as a contrast, they don't like to call themselves this, but other people call them yellow shamanism because they experience such deep Buddhist influence. Yellow because the main tradition of Buddhism that came in was the yellow hat school, the Gelugpa school. So hence those shamans are called yellow shamans, not by themselves, but by other people.
So it's sort of like a derogatory term, right?
Yes and no. At this point, if you go to the capital, Ulaanbaatar, you talk to people, that to them, like, it is what it is. Like, some of them will admit to having more Buddhist influence. Some of them will say that they don't have as much Buddhist influence. It's not become so derogatory anymore, but it is. It's interesting because the thing is, even the black shamans that I've encountered, they will admit that Buddhism and Buddhist shamanic practices they've come up with tools and like technologies that are new, that don't exist within the black shamanic tradition, which they will admit may sometimes be more helpful or may be more appropriate in certain situations. Let me give you an example. One of my close friends, she is a shaman from the Black Darkhad tradition, and she was dealing with a client in which a particular land spirit was essentially not harassing them, but basically the family wanted to move away, and the land spirit was making it difficult for them to do so. And she had to go and try to negotiate. My friend had to try to negotiate with this land spirit. And this land spirit was very defensive. It was basically about to attack her. It was basically coiling itself around her, basically like going in for the kill. And in her within her tradition specifically, the only thing you can do is just to try to fight it and see what happens. But because her uncle is Mongolian Buddhist Rinpoche, or elder monk, who has taught her some mantras, she started reciting a very specific mantra to land spirits that developed within the Buddhist tradition. And that land spirit immediately calmed down and was then they were ready to talk. If she stuck with the black shamanic tradition, they would have had a fight, and who knows what would have happened.
That goes back to the whole curse aspect of this work, right? Because like, if you lose one of those fights, that could be you in the hospital for a little bit of time, or possibly even dead if it was that severe of a loss. It's not like what you're describing here as let's get into a fight with a spirit is without risk. It's actually the opposite. Like, I think it needs to be pointed out, because that sounds like a nice isekai anime. We go to another world, we have a nice little fight, it's great times, right, like, and level up. But in truth, those encounters are actually profoundly dangerous encounters that like, even if you win, you still could get hurt. Like, even if you can't get the spirit to exhaustion and can then sort of talk it down after the fight, you're still beat up. Like,
right.
You're
still got bruises.
You need weeks to recover, like, where you might not be okay, even though we have to be in a Western mindset here, at least, and have to go to work, you might not be able to. Like,
exactly,
you might be too sick to actually go to work for a little while. It's real consequences to those kind of encounters that I think desexify the shaman path. If you have any experience with those kind of encounters, that when you're sick for a week or 2 weeks or more, it really kind of puts it in the context how difficult that means, to go back to the original thing of like why this is considered a curse.
Definitely. It's one thing that almost what I see with younger modern shamans within these traditional societies, they are definitely more open to learning more spiritual practices from, you know, other traditions or even other cultures, maybe because maybe they have a method for something that they don't have, and they're more open to combining the methods. At the end of the day, it comes down to whether or not that method will be in harmony with the spirits that they already have. Because what also tends to happen is there, like, for example, like with me, you know, being born and raised in the US, when you are young and kind of looking for spiritual practices on Google, there's, you know, the things that come up are a lot of Western traditions. And I definitely had to dabble in those practices. And I will admit, for me, I don't know for anyone else, but for me, they just were not coming out that effectively. And it's because ultimately for me, that's because those, I mean, there's still methods and they still had some degree of effect, but it didn't balance or didn't flow with the spiritual entities that I already had that were with me. So even though it did produce some effect, it wasn't just that effective as it is for other people. And so for me, it's being able to identify, if I were to learn methods from other cultures, or other practices, other traditions, I have to see if it's something that my spirits are able to even be able to support. Ironically, what they actually encouraged me in my own journey to actually learn the folk magic that is indigenous to the Americas, because their reasoning, and I can see this now, their reasoning is that if I need to do spiritual work and I'm using, you know, tools and herbs or whatever that are native to this place, I have to be tapped into the land spirits that are native to this land, even though my ancestral spirits are not from this land. So it becomes a very unique experience. And my friends in Asia, in North Asia, are very fascinated with this, the fact that I have to be able to sort of reconcile working with ancestral shamanic spirits, but the local land spirits of the U.S. essentially.
The land spirits in New York City are not going to be the same as the land spirits in North Asia, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Most definitely not.
And the land spirits of New York City are not the same things you have to worry about in Toronto either. So
yeah. So in referencing your ancestral spirits there, did you find that there was a little bit of a culture shock translation growing up as Asian American, and be like, hey, this is what it was, the values of what it means to be an Asian in Asia, but we're not there anymore?
You know, it's funny you ask that, because for me, what I found is that there's different layers of culture shock and culture shock, because when we look at, you know, the population of Asian Americans, let's be honest, the vast majority are not from North Asia. The vast majority are East, Southeast, and South Asia. So it's the culture shock for me has many different layers as an Asian American, because obviously there's the normal shock of Asian American and Asian values within a mainstream America. But then even within the Asian communities here, I would be like, that's not really what my family does, or that's not really what we do either. Like, for example, I had no idea what dim sum was until I was well into a teenager, because I've never had it before until then. And so it's a little bit unique because of that level. And we bring it back to the spiritual level. Actually, for ancestral spirits, there's a little bit more layer of understanding, because my particular ancestors, who were Manchus, they themselves were multicultural in the Asian sense, because they are from a specific region within North Asia. They have to frequently travel and interact with people from other parts of North Asia. And for those who know anything about Chinese history, the Manchus, we conquered China and then kind of moved in. And so then we have to deal with people who are south of the wall, or south of the Great Wall. Yeah. So even back then, I like with those spirits were, in a sense, that they had to become multicultural when they were living. So they So in that sense, my ancestral spirits were a little bit more understanding about values being different, or what is culturally significant being different. Obviously, within America, there's cases where it's a little bit more pronounced, because at least within Asia, we all kind of share very similar astrology. So there's always points that we can still relate to. Within America, it's a little, when they're coming across Western traditions, there always is some level of confusion, both on my spirit's part as well as on my part. If I visit spiritual practitioners from other cultures and we see their work, we're kind of trying to like, it's almost like that meme of, that woman and there's like geometry things kind of appearing. We're just kind of looking at it like that, and going like trying to figure this out. So.
Right. So I mean, that's especially with that one piece you're saying. It's like, again, for the context of Qing Dynasty, right? Because in your book you do talk about people using hexagrams and people using trigrams, and there's a lot of Chinese influence on things. So this is where I know, culturally speaking, there is multiple epicenters in Asia, and then how does that even synergize with the different cultures, like Manchu specifically, because, well, they did run it for 400 years, right? But how does that integration work into your own practices of using, say, native Chinese practices like the I Ching, Bagua, things like that?
Well, I mean, we don't use it to the same level of depth as some of the, especially like, for example, some of the Chinese Taoists might. We use it. To be frank, we probably use it very superficially, but we do use it in the sense of, like, for example, astrology is very important in pretty much all North Asian shamanic work. They're either using Tibetan astrology or Chinese astrology, and they are both very similar to each other. So as we've come across, especially like Chinese culture, when we look at, the animal astrology, the elemental astrology, the trigrams, we do use that in order to optimize our own work, because we have noticed that the conditions that the Chinese cosmology creates, there's truth to that, in terms of if we overlay how we practice our own practice on top of those, and under those astrological conditions, there is a difference in the effects of our own work. So because of that, the thing with North Asian shamanism, especially with Mongolia and more of the nomadic peoples, is because if they are nomadic, then they're going to value being practical. So a lot of being practical is things that you can do pretty easily, things that you can do on the go, and things you can learn from other cultures that will make your practice easier or more effective. So because of that sense, we do have a proclivity to observe and learn what other peoples are doing, and we're going to see if that's something that is going to work well with what we do, or if it's going to clash. And of course, what our spirits think as well. Is it something that they're willing to accept, or is that something that they're going to be against? One example I want to bring up earlier, which I forgot, which I can bring up now, is that kind of going back into the whole Buddhism thing, within the Darkhat Valley, which is the valley in the North Mongolia where the Darkhats are based, there is a cave that is sacred to one Mongolian deity known as Dayandir. And Dayandir, in his story, he welcomed Buddhism's influence into Mongolia to the extent that he was actually willing to work with them. And so his legend became that he became a protector of shamans who used Buddhism in their practice. But the Darkhat tribe at that time was firmly against this. They stopped worshiping him, and they basically placed a curse on their own people that basically says that anyone who tries to work with Dayandir or even visit that sacred cave is going to come into a deadly accident. And according to my friends, observations, the people she knows who have, they usually died in a car crash like within a week. I don't know why they love using car crash. In Mongolia, curses manifest through car crashes. I don't know why, but
horses. It's the new mode of travel.
Right.
Plus, that actually car travel is the most dangerous method of travel. So it's the easiest thing to affect with a curse.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. But yeah, so I guess the point that I want to make with that story is that ultimately it does, like, we obviously want to check just whether or not the practices work on, you know, an energetic level, but there's also the spirit's own opinions on whether or not they're open. Oftentimes they are, if they come across a practice that they're not aware of. But if there is already an innate enmity between them, then that kind of stops the conversation.
Right. So how do they confirm, like, is this more like intuitive? Are they doing divinations to confirm these things, to see if there's any discrepancies? Like, how would they go about that?
Well, it always starts with divination. So we use divination to confirm things. Well, we do divination to check things, and if we really need further confirmation, then they'll actually do transpossession, in which then the spirits will be able to directly say what is that they intend. But before anything, we always do divination. Like, pretty much for any the step-by-step process for whenever we do any type of spiritual work is, first we need to check the astrology to see if the conditions are favorable or not, and then we'll do divination usually at the same time to see if there's anything that might, just to, you know, learn more about the situation. Is there any external influences that we should be aware of? What is going on within any of the work? And then if divination, if through astrology and divination everything checks out, works out fine, there's nothing like wrong with doing this particular ceremony, then that's when we'll do it.
So, personal experiences now. I mean, this is where, do you have any fun stories? I mean, you talked about in the book about you started off in dreams, and the ancestral spirits were like, yo, what up, basically, to you.
Yeah, basically.
So, and that was quite late from what I understood in the reading. It was more like later on, not so early.
Yeah, I mean, that's not to say that spirits didn't try so early, but I think, you know, what it is that there are definitely signs and conditions that appeared earlier in my childhood, but because I grew up in an environment where I was essentially, I mean, my parents are both atheists, to the extent that they view pretty much all spiritual practices as, you know, superstition or things that the uneducated folk are into. So basically it was never a topic that we discussed. So I think even if the spirits did anything, it would not be noticed. We would just treat things as medical conditions and move on. So I didn't really actually notice until, and actually I visited a Korean shaman several years ago, and she brought up things from my childhood which I completely repressed, which I, you know, forgot about, because she brought up when I was a child, when I went to sleep at night, I always saw figures, I guess like ghosts or whatever, and I would always hide under the covers and basically just like wait until I fell asleep that way. This happened, you know, when I was a childhood, I would say almost every day. And then as the years went by, I completely forgot about this. And, you know, the Korean shaman, she brought it up. I'm like, oh, thank you for reminding me about that. I forgot that for a reason.
Thanks for reminding me about the nightmares.
Yeah, just bring back all that trauma from childhood
Right
there after a shamanic session. Going back to the curse comment, right there it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, I mean, she's a great friend of mine, but yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, so it wasn't really until later in life, or when I really became an adult, that things happened again, and I just noticed them happening, and I had the curiosity to dig into them, and, you know, and certain things became more. I think what the spirits is, they poke us a lot, but they don't fully push or activate things until they believe it is an appropriate time. So I think when I was younger, they were just kind of poking me, but it wasn't an appropriate time yet at that time. So even in North Asia, most shamans don't even get into their shamanic sickness until like in their late 20s, early 30s. That just seems to be like the trend culturally. So yeah,
God,
so it's
that sounds so familiar.
I know, right?
Doesn't it, Zach? Doesn't that sound real
It
familiar?
totally does. It sounds
An
real
ancient-
familiar.
yeah, so it's so yeah, it didn't really kick in until that time. I do talk about it in the introduction, and so and I'm pretty sure my spirits are kind of playing puppets with things happening in my life, because lo and behold, 2016, they told me to. Well, I had an opportunity at work come up to say, hey, go work in our Hong Kong office for a couple of years, basically go to Asia. And so I was like, okay, sure. So during that time, I was able to do a lot of traveling. Went to Mongolia a couple times, went to Manchuria, went to, all over Asia, Japan several times, Korea several times, all over. And then 2018, I think it was like the summer of 2018, my spirits are like, okay, you're good. You can go back now. You should go back. Lo and behold, a year later is when the Hong Kong protests started. And then right after that, COVID. So kind of makes sense. One interesting story is when I was in Mongolia, So I'm going to go back to the Dark Gods again, because I did visit them. And the thing with the Dark Gods and the Manchus, actually, we were enemies during much of the Qing dynasty, because they resisted our occupation. Some Mongols liked us, some Mongols didn't. They're one of the ones who didn't. And there was a particular ceremony that we were supposed to go to, but then my friend checked with her elders and then came to me and said, so you can't go to this ceremony. And I said, why not? It's like, well, that particular spirit, the spirit house that we're visiting, that spirit was a great warrior who fought against Manchus. So we don't want you to die. So just don't even go. We'll go, but you stay here. And the way that she says, she went to her elder and to check, because she heard stories. So she went to her elder and check, and her elder's response was, do you like this guy or do you want to kill him? Because if you want to kill him, bring him along.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
So at least you know that person actually likes you.
Yeah, we are really good friends, actually. It's like we're friends now.
Different story right now. It would have been a
very
different story.
We're friends now, but our ancestors were not.
Yeah. I mean, some dynasties go back, some time periods go back, and grievances don't get let go.
Yeah,
I think one of the things too, to kind of end maybe on the hate mail we're going to probably get from this show, because we're already talking about the shamanic path as it's basically a curse. But you also mentioned that there's different levels of shamans. There's like big and little, wild and domestic, different type of classifications for how involved the shaman is. Really, that's really the best way I would read into the book. It's how involved they are, or how much responsibility they have, or how much the spirits bother them.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually a tough chapter to write, because every tribe, every culture classifies their shamans differently. And I came to the conclusion that I'm not going to try to reconcile them. I will just instead say, here's what it is. Among these people, they classify them this way. Among those people, they classify them that way. I touched on, black versus yellow in terms of Buddhist influence. There's black versus white in terms of the level or the type of work they did. The big and versus the small. That's actually something specifically within the Amur River Valley. Within those particular tribes, they're a little bit more open in that they believe everyone should be engaged in spiritual or even some level of shamanic work, but there are some things that should only be done by the quote unquote the big shamans, which essentially is from other traditions' perspective, the actual legitimate shamans. In their perspective, everyone who does some level of shamanic work or work with the spirits can be classified as a little shaman. And basically what that entails is they give offerings to their ancestral spirits who are with them. They give offerings to the land spirits. They're able to do some level of divination for themselves and for their families. They're able to do some level of treatments. They can go into a light trance, kind of similar to how people in the West sometimes go into a light trance to do certain spiritual work. So the Amur River people definitely are probably the most kind of open gate in terms of everyone learning a little bit. Part of their education for their families and for their children is that all the children are taught some level of drumming and dancing so that they can be able to do some level of work for themselves. Only big shamans are allowed to do work for other people outside of their families, and those big shamans can do work that is normally too dangerous for anyone who's not a big shaman to do, or in other tribes anyone who's not a shaman can do. So some of the more dangerous work, some of the psychopomp work. Actually, there's another classification of shamans that specialize in psychopomp work, because that's actually considered very dangerous as well. So basically that's kind of my attempt to be able to just show how these different peoples just classify different things. I'm hoping what that chapter will do is that it gives a people some idea of their own spiritual practice, what might be capable within their own bounds, and what might be leave to someone else who's more equipped for that. And then that's why I also have listed several types of non-shamanic spiritual roles that exist within these societies as well, because just because they're non-shamanic, their spiritual roles are still very much important, just for a community's spiritual health.
Very cool. Now, David, do you have any upcoming events? I know you do kind of do the festival circuit. It seems fairly a month. Do you have any upcoming festivals or things you're going to soon?
I do. Not as much as I would like, because life has gotten in the way. I am doing Witches Fest USA in New York City. That's down in the Astor Place of East Village area. I had planned to do sort of other festivals too, but I don't think I have anything else planned for the summer. If anything, I'm actually appearing on podcasts and live radios a lot more right now. But it's in terms of actual events, that's probably the only one that's upcoming. I am speaking to several bookstores in the New York City area about doing events there. I don't have any plans yet to travel to other places. I'm very much open to it. I would love to be able to travel to other places.
If you come to Toronto, we have a store and a ritual space.
Awesome.
So you're most welcome to give a talk, or if you want to do more than talk, we'd love to have you up in East Chinatown.
Toronto life.
There's two Chinatowns up here, so
yeah.
That makes sense. I think New York technically has a 3.
Probably, yeah. We're in the not rich Chinatown, the east side of Chinatown.
So the original one?
No, the original one is the rich one.
Oh, really? That surprises
where
me.
It's like this is more like where Chinese people actually still live.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Chinese and Vietnamese people live in this area. So, yeah. That's pretty much all I have coming out. I'll definitely consider the Toronto area, but it's actually really interesting because I want to do more this summer, but I'm actually making it was somewhat last minute, but I'm making a sort of a pilgrimage trip to Mongolia again this August. Nice.
Yeah, so that'll definitely be interesting and fun. But it's otherwise I'm also in grad school part-time, so that eats up so much time as well.
Yep, grad school or working full time. Working full time plus grad school just kills you.
And adding a book on top of that, I don't know how I'm still functioning. But
so we'd love to have you come back on. We maybe talk about the first book that's a little bit older. Give a little time, a couple months, but maybe we'd love to have you come on and talk about that one too.
Yeah, sure. It's one thing I'll definitely say as a kind of a caveat, and I think that I've heard other authors say that it's because I wrote that book earlier. If I take a look through it again, there's parts I'm like, ooh, I wish I wrote this differently, or it's like, oh,
having wrote a book 10 years ago that I wish I could now give an updated version that has more advanced techniques. I definitely understand where you're coming from there.
It's like I'm like, wow, I was such an idiot when I wrote this. This, like, I did not realize this, that I did not know. It's like you learn so much since then that you're like, oh, okay, it's about that thing I wrote years ago.
I just take it as that's its own thing. It exists as itself, and that was it.
Right. Yeah. So part of, I don't know if people have picked up on it, but in the book that I just wrote, I kind of addressed some of those things from the previous book a little bit. So, just to cover my bases.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Very good. Yeah. So, if you're interested, this book, if you're in Toronto, for no cost to you, you can come to our library and check it out. Just read it while it's here. We're about to release a whole line of now that COVID is officially WHO sort of done, even though it's not done, but it's sort of done. We're going to basically have our original, what we had before, which is that you can come in, buy teas that we'll have available. Obviously, we have actually the products to make all the teas here. So we've got about 500 herbs that we carry in stock on a regular basis between Western and Chinese herbs. So Western and Chinese magic and Vedic magics to make different teas. So come in, check out the book, buy tea, just sit and drink, and you don't have to pay anything. But if you want to check out the book and you're a sponsor, guess what? We have a library system that you can actually check out all the books, and we have about 1,500 different books you can check out in our occult library for sponsors. Some of which are actually pretty rare. You can't check those out, but you could look at them. We won't say which ones are rare, but there's some East Asian materials that are really rare, and there's some hoodoo stuff that's conjure stuff that's not able to be found easily, that we would not let anything leave. But our library is pretty balanced. We've had people come here and say they're really amazed at how balanced it is across multiple cultures. And it's not 1,500 books get you a pretty in-depth series of topics on most traditions. It's not like it's one or two books on any topic. It's got some depth. We're pretty proud of it.
It's categorized. It's there. You get to see it organized. And if we see you having that book too long, we're going to say, buy it from the author. We'll hook you up.
That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to be like, you had this book checked out for 4 weeks. To send you a little email saying, hey, support David here.
Support David.
Book, right? Which is the point. The when raising ships rises all tides rises all ships, right? You know what I'm saying? And that's what we want to do. So as sponsors, we have a few things coming up. We already talked about the protection ritual. What else we got going on if you're a sponsor and you're supporting to keep us to have the lights on and have all these authors like David come on?
Is crystals to attract love. Then we have a money draw ritual. Then we have herbs for money. Then we're going to have the summer solstice ritual. So
I usually do the money rituals, so I'll probably be doing those. And
you will, sir.
Right.
After that, we got lucky numbers and angels. We got Zachary ritual, and then we got a few other things like feng shui type workshops going on. And on top of that, how to communicate with a goddess. So we have your plethora of different workshops coming up, and then we got July hitting, and we're working with Stephanie Colony for the 72 Goetia rituals and PDF books. with the Semaphore-Wraths. So 3
which is the
approach.
names of God and ceremonial magic. So we're calling out the names of gods and all the demons at not the same time. It's going to
Not
be
the same
different
time.
rituals.
All night.
That would be a little rough. Although we have heard stories of people calling out all 72 demons at once, which I don't know why you do that, but okay. I don't even know how you keep track of them all at that point. But that's okay. That's okay. I've heard stories, but this is actually different than like Stephanie's immersion class or other classes you might have heard, because essentially it's not just us giving you the materials. You're going to come to the ritual and you can be part of it. Not only that, Zach is experienced acupuncturist. I'm experienced exorcist and Reiki healer. And, you know, if there's any issues, we're going to take care of you and make sure you're okay. And one actual experience with the spirit is probably worth 100 books, maybe more. So you can have actual experiences with all the spirits. You're not going to leave that Goetia class wanting to work with all of them. You'll probably be some. You're like, yeah, I really didn't like that experience at all, and we'll be like, yeah, okay, that's okay, that happens. But you probably will be
we got
few,
70 more.
Few,
We got
you'll be
70
like, yeah,
more.
71 more that you might like. They'll have different personalities and vibes, and when you summon them, they're totally different effects. And like we said, we're going to go over that. If you're here or if you're online, we have techniques to kind of connect to the rituals online and basically help you make it a real connection. And then we'll still help you walk through it through hypnosis and through energy work, distant energy work, to kind of clean you up if there's a negative reaction. If there's a positive reaction, we'll help you put it into the right context so you don't get obsessional about something or like that. So either way, you know, this is real work. We're going to do it for a few years because we're doing it every 2 weeks. If you're a sponsor helping us keep the lights on, you know, even if you come now, you'll get in. If you come a little later when we're still going in it, well, you missed a couple of the spirits. So, but it's still worthwhile. And we're great from our friend from Alberta, Azure Flame. He's given us, we're going to get 72 slate tiles to kind of bless every week for the store. That, again, we have multiple public shrines. We had multiple public shrines, but we still are resetting them up in a different place because the building made us move them. So whatever, they're going to get what they get. I wouldn't want to mess with the spirits. I really wouldn't mess with the spirits that we set up. But okay, whatever, you know, whatever. I guess people are going to do what people are going to do. Corporate people, they get what they get. But we are resetting up all these public and free shrines. An ancestor shrine will be set up again that you can just come here, do what you got to do. We know Toronto has a housing shortage, so you might only live in one room. So if you need to pray, there's several people who watch the show on a regular basis that come here every week, leave offerings. We take care of it. You can kind of pray, meditate. That's going to be set up again in a couple weeks. So you can come back here and pray. There's various Buddhist shrines that we have that you can come and pray to the Buddhist spirits that we work with. And, you know, so all these shrines are here. If you want to come and just basically do work, not with our supervision, you don't have to buy anything. They're just here for you as part of supporting the community in general. And if you have particular spirits and we have a relationship with those spirits that you want us to put up a shrine, ask us. We're probably amenable to it. More amenable than you'd think. Just ask. You might be surprised who we're willing to kind of do a ritual with, and if there's particular ones, like particularly with the Dead Shrine. Lots of people brought spirits that we were very familiar with, but we weren't thinking of putting them on with the Ancestor Shrine, but people brought them, blessed them, so other people could access the spiritual energies of the gods they work with if they so provide, if they want to, and they could try it out. And it's all there. Blessed talismans to Hakate, to Hermes, to the Barons and Voodoo, to, you know, Sante Morte, to Osiris. People actually brought in and donated. Yeah, people donated their personal talismans that are part of the community to build up the ancestor altar. So there's different god forms that maybe you're not sure, you know, what calls you. You can kind of see, and all the tools are there for people to in the shrines that you could use. And we've never had anyone steal anything, so it's there. It's all publicly donated. I don't know what else to say about the public shrines except it's pretty cool.
They're pretty cool. They're there. So with that, they will be up in a few weeks. We are actually getting a whole shrine room set up again. Because they're not in the hall anymore, but they will have a shrine room, so you can pop in and see that. So with that said,
we signed the necessary contracts to make sure that shrine room comes back, and it's going to be here. So if you're a sponsor, that's what you're supporting. So you're not just supporting us having a store that we sell things. You're supporting the shrines, the public library. You're supporting the ability for people who are spiritually inclined to have a place to actually come to and just hang out, which is important. Not necessarily to have to go to a bar, and if you want, you could just come hang out in a place that actually has a fair amount of magicians who actually come by, and actual shamans by our definition today, who come by and just hang out. Not necessarily under pressure to sell anything here. They just actually come to hang out, to sit.
You come to hang out. You get to chill. You might hear some things, and then you might just learn just by assimilation. We go old school.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. It's a place to just come to. So, again, for all the people who are sponsors, you really make us. You really keep it going. And again, if you want any of our 400 herbs, of which there's only about 20 in this picture, please come by. We'll hook you up.
And again, if you are interested in getting that book from David, it's in the library, and we'll see if we can get his other book in for the upcoming interview in the future, possibly, right? So with that, you can always reach out to David and see if North Asian shamanism is in your drift. And if it isn't, you should still check it out. So with that said, thank you everyone for tonight. Stay safe, stay healthy, and then
and thank you, David, for coming on.
Thank you.